You know, as all of you know, and I say this almost every time, coming up with new material to describe Linux as great is very tough for me. And giving an update on the state of Linux is starting to become a little boring. So I thought I would just make it easy for all of you with one simple slide, which is Linux, my hyperbole history has finally caught up with my hyperbole. Linux really now does represent one of the greatest shared technology investments in the history of computing. And while that used to be a little bit of hyperbole, let's say maybe 10 years ago or so, it really has reached a scale where Linux powers so many aspects of the computing that runs modern society that it really has reached this stature. I don't think there's a much higher stature you can aspire to for an open source project or for this form of collaborative development. And so what Linux has done is not only provided this great shared technology asset to mankind, but what I'd rather talk about today is what Linux has been sort of the existence proof for, and where, from the Linux Foundation's perspective, we see this kind of mass collaboration that's represented best by Linux headed. And what really is going on is that the landscape of mass collaboration is changing. The way people develop technology is changing. People are collaborating even more, and that form of collaboration is accelerating and professionalizing. And is that even a word, professionalizing? Becoming a profession. You know, how many people in this room work in open source as your full-time job? Like, see, look at that. See, I told you, people make money off of open source software, right? Everyone always says, well, it's free, so no one can make any money. But really, open source has become a profession, and it has become what I would argue is one of the most important ways that technology gets developed in modern computing. And I think this is represented by the explosion of projects and foundations that are supporting this form of mass collaboration. It seems like every other day I hear an announcement about a new large-scale open source project or a new foundation. You've got the OpenStack Foundation, the Linux Foundation, you've got the Cloud Foundry Foundation. There's like a whole bunch of BSD foundations, and I can't really figure out which one is which, but there's lots of them. But you get the idea. There's lots and lots of these organizations that every day are springing up to help enable large-scale collaboration akin to what is going on in the Linux kernel. And so the question is, why is this happening? Why are we seeing this big change? Well, I think Mark Andreessen said it well in 2011 when he talked about how software is eating the world, how so many aspects of the tech industry are now becoming very software-focused. This is best represented, I think, in the networking industry that's being disrupted in a big way as networking hardware is literally being abstracted into software in the form of software-defined networking and network function virtualization. In this case, literally software is eating that sort of hardware industry that existed in the past. And it's just across every sector of technology, whether it's a exponential increase in the number of lines of code in an automobile where there almost used to be none only just a few years ago. Literally every aspect of technology, so many aspects of our lives are being affected by software. So software really is eating the world. But I think what's equally important to notice is, and I think that Ibrahim Haddad of Samsung said this well in the same publication, the Wall Street Journal in 2014, that open source itself is sort of eating the software world. Right? It's a combination of software becoming more important and then within software, open source becoming more important. And I like to describe this as a new Pareto principle for software development. Does everyone here know what the Pareto principle is? Maybe we should have made this one of our trivia questions. Does everyone know what that is? Anyone? 80-20. There you go. That's exactly right. It's the 80-20 rule. This is sort of the idea that 80% of the value comes from sort of 20% of something, and in sales, people say 20% of the salespeople represent 80% of the sales volume, or that's where all the value comes from. And I think that's going on in open source as well, and in tech writ large. It looks a little like this. Today in a lot of enterprise computing platforms and technology projects, you would see about 30% of the code in any particular product or service being open source, and then the rest would be proprietary code on that. What we're seeing at the Linux Foundation is a dramatic shift from, a smaller part of code in any particular product or service and technology being open source software to the majority of the code in any technology product or service being open source, really getting to this 80% open source code in any product or service as opposed to just 30%. What I'm saying here and what the industry is showing us is that the majority, the vast majority of code in any technical product and service in the future will be open source and will be a result of shared development. And organizations will add their value in that sort of 20%, whether they release that code as open source or that's their proprietary code or whatever, doesn't matter. What shared development allows organizations to do is share and innovate at that kind of broad infrastructure layer, and then focus on the things that really makes their company interesting and different. And this is what, in almost every sector of tech, this is where we see the industry going. And people, they're coming right out and saying it, right? Samsung Electronics, you can't build anything today without open source. Sony, one of the great consumer electronics companies in the world, 80% of the software in their handsets are open source. What's really happening here is that the nature of collaboration is changing. In the industry before, the main way that people collaborated, mainly to enable interoperability, was through standard-setting organizations. This is sort of where organizations would get together and collaborate. Well, today, that's really being usurped and sort of, not completely, standards aren't going to go away, but open source is now becoming the dominant form of collaboration in the industry. Often open source projects lead standards. Standards are developed after an open source project becomes sort of the de facto standard throughout the industry. And so open source is really becoming this new way to enable the tech industry to provide 80% of the code that goes into all of the things that are going to be a part of all of our lives. And open source works because it's based on what most of you do really, really well, which is create great code, you work through technical merit, you come up with unexpected ideas and innovation. It's that focus on code that makes open source work. But one of the things that I thought I would talk about today is what are the role of organizations like the ones I mentioned here? What are the role of these kind of foundations in open source development? Why are we seeing more and more of these kinds of organizations spring up around the world? What do foundations do to enable shared development? And so, usually the first rule of the Linux Foundation, by the way, is don't talk about the Linux Foundation. Second rule of the Linux Foundation, don't talk about it. But today I'm actually going to talk about what the Linux Foundation does, mainly as an example of what I think we're going to see over time are organizations that help facilitate the great work that developers do all over the world. And I thought I would best describe that using a popular internet meme to describe what exactly I do at the Linux Foundation. And so you can see here, does everyone know this meme? Pretty much? All right. This is what my friends think I do, right? So I go around the world giving speeches, Actually, to be honest, my friends actually have no idea what I do at all. But that's what they think I do. This is what my mom thinks I do. You see how I've got my hand up there in the first photo? Also, my mom just Actually, my mom also doesn't know what I do, but she just thinks I'm a Boy Scout. That's really the bottom line of what my mom thinks I do. This is what society thinks I do. I don't know where they get this idea, or who could have said something like that. This is what developers think I do. I actually solicited this photo from people. Yeah, let's get that code done. We're going to have the Bobs come in here and talk about what exactly do you do, Linus Torvalds? Of course, this is what I think I do, right? You know, I tell this joke about you know, how I'm Linus Torvalds' boss. It's getting a little old, I think, right? But you know, I'd like to think that, you know, I run a decent organization. I am a pretty good boss. But that's not really what I do. I'm not really Linus Torvalds' boss or really anybody's boss. I think the best idea of what I do and what Foundation should do is this. I'm really Linus Torvalds' janitor, you know. I get nodding in agreement a little too quick over here. But you know, I'm half joking, but I am also serious. I think that that's what foundations can do. That keeping the development process clean, keeping it moving, helping it out, making it better, you know, keeping all of those things going that you need to do this great work is really the role of foundations. And so, you know, I'd like to go through where I think organizations like this add value and where we're going to see more and more of these kind of organizations providing this kind of value, right? Because when you reach this kind of scale of development, where any particular open source project becomes so critical to the world or to the industry, it's important to have first a place where resources can be collected in a fair and open manner. An open home, a neutral home matters, right? Why does it matter? Because it enables structured investment in these projects. It enables a way for people to know that everyone's playing on the same level playing field, that everyone can contribute at a huge, unprecedented scale, millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of engineers, and know that that software will be equally shared to create value for not only yourself, but others. That's, you know, really important when you're investing at this kind of scale. When this kind of software is running 80% of the code in your product or service, you want to know that you can count on that code, that it's shared neutrally, that it has a neutral home. And so that's what I think foundations can do. In addition, foundations can help the industry understand open source. You know, one of the insights at the Linux Foundation that we had fairly early, even though lots of corporations, you know, join our organization, help us provide the funding to manage this great shared resource. One of the jobs that we have is not explaining the industry to the open source community, it's in fact the exact opposite. That we need to work with the industry to show them how they can participate in a development process that works, that doesn't need fixing. But if you integrate it into your business processes, if you understand how to consume code, integrate it into your products, improve it, share that code back out with open source projects, that will improve your company. So we actually spend a lot of time doing this in a huge variety of different industry sectors. Telecommunications. We work with the automotive industry through a project called Automotive Grade Linux to help them do just this. Bring in code for their next generation of platforms that you'll see in automotive vehicles, you know, in the future, largely based on open source, help them understand how to bring this code in, keep what they want to keep, share what they want to share. All of that is something that we help enable. That gets more developers to the party, more industries participating in this great shared development project, and we think that's important. Foundations also allow for shared IP management and legal defense. This is important too, because again, this is the software that runs most of the world, right? Whether it's managing a trademark, helping people with license compliance related to open source code, doing things like providing a legal defense fund Years ago, the Linux Foundation, before we even were named the Linux Foundation, raised a $10 million legal defense fund to help defend in the SCO lawsuit, which threatened the Linux platform. We have a patent commons. We have something called SPDX, which provides a way for people to share licensing data to make it easier to comply with the legal framework that governs open source in the form of licensing. We have open source legal training, legal summits. These are all the things that help, again, it's kind of keeping the halls clean, right? Let the coding happen by teaching lawyers how to enable their engineers rather than to restrict their engineers from participating in these projects. That's what we do at the Linux Foundation, is we provide this kind of value so that developers can do the things that they want to do. Shared infrastructure is another thing. This gets back to the sysadmin, right? This is, in order to enable coding, you've got to have all of the infrastructure in place to do it. And to quote many a sysadmin, the bathroom is never clean enough, right? Keeping all of the infrastructure up and secure and running that enable, whether it's at kernel.org or a wide variety of other open source projects, is very important. Having a structured code review process so that people know where the software came from, that they understand the provenance of code. Shared testing infrastructure, release management. These are all things where professional people at very large scale across a huge variety of open source projects now have full-time jobs doing it. You're starting to see the picture here, right? We're getting from a world where it was sort of this ad hoc, self-organizing community to a world where we have professional people who help organize these communities to make them even better, to accelerate the development, make them stronger and bigger than they have ever been before. Foundations even provide homes for key developers. It's important to have a neutral home for key developers. For example, this guy. Now, this isn't our only, I kind of promise, that I wouldn't just constantly be referring to, so really Greg also works at the Linux Foundation. I promised Greg that I would, from now on, I'm just going to talk about Greg all the time. That's why you're getting a thumbs up over there. And so in addition to enabling this kind of large-scale development, one of the things that's also important for foundations to look at and recognize, whether it's the Linux Foundation or any open source organization, is that we also have to address market failures. There are times where the open source development process isn't the greatest thing in the world or hasn't worked as it has intended to. And the Core Infrastructure Initiative is a great example of the community coming together and with industry to solve those kind of problems as well. It isn't that open source is a bad development model or that the open source process doesn't work well, but sometimes it just fails. In the case of OpenSSL, we had a project where, open source, transparent development, but there just weren't enough people looking at the code. The project didn't have enough resources commensurate with the important role that OpenSSL played in securing the internet. And so one of the things that the foundation has done is we raised millions of dollars to go support these kind of projects where they need some help in the form of resources, in the form of code audit, in the form of testing infrastructure, in the form of actual server infrastructure, and so forth. And we've funded several projects already to help improve them, with the combined expertise of companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, you name it. These are important things to do to keep this ecosystem healthy, to enable this great code to flow. Finally, I think what's important for people to understand about foundations and about this new world of mass collaboration is that foundations also bring more developers to the party. Again, it's not just the Linux Foundation, the OpenStack Foundation, other foundations do the same thing. And what's interesting about this, and an observation that I've had, is that marketing matters, even in open source. so many people in the development community in particular got into open source development to get away from the marketing people, right? Like that was the whole point, right? Is that we're not going to listen to these crazy marketing people. We're not going to, they don't know what they're talking about. We're just going to go make and build the kind of software that we know is technically right. That's like the whole reason so many people got into open source. But what's interesting is that marketing matters even in open source. But it's a little bit different, right? It's not that it's some product marketing person at a company that's trying to tell you what to do. Now what matters is having people to market your particular open source project so that you can get more people to the party. I think it matters. I think you can have the greatest technology in the world, and if no one's ever heard of it, you're not going to get a lot of participation. And I think we've seen that, in particular with some of the newer open source projects that have done a great job of promoting the project, getting more people into their developer community, therefore getting more code, better quality, then getting more people aware of it, and kind of creating this virtuous cycle of development. Because this kind of marketing and promotion of any open source project really adds more fuel to the open source fire, right? It helps promote open source in new vertical industries, right? Like I spend a lot of time working with car companies, convincing them that they should move away from their stale proprietary platforms into open source. What is the result of that? You're going to get more engineers from companies like Toyota and Jaguar Land Rover participating in the kernel development process that have not been there before and would not be there if we hadn't reached out to them and promoted the use of open source and Linux in those new industries. Industry upon industry, company upon company, that's what we do at the foundation. Events like this, the whole concept of LinuxCon and all the events that we run at Linux aren't about some kind of like business meetup. These are the events where actual project maintainers meet, get together regularly face to face, so that you can accelerate development rather than arguing over a mailing list for months and months and months. I can't imagine that happens. It's much more difficult to be argumentative face to face. And it tends sometimes to produce a good outcome. So being a place where people can get together and further accelerate events matter. And then training is another thing. One of the biggest problems at the Linux Foundation that we're seeing in open source is frankly a lack of people like you. How many people here, like your job is open source? Like a lot, right? We need more and more and more people like you throughout the globe. This is a global problem that we see at the Linux Foundation all the time. So today I want to talk a little bit about training and some of the efforts that we're doing in order to improve this situation. The demand for Linux skills has been far outpaced, or the demand for the supply of labor has been far outpaced by the demand for Linux. Like Linux is growing faster than any platform in the history of computing, has been for many, many years, and the supply of labor just isn't keeping up with it. We need more and more people like all of you folks in this industry. I get this everywhere I go, whether it's in China or Europe or Japan or Korea or here. And we just released a report last year that shows this. 93% of managers are trying to hire Linux professionals. 90% of those say it's hard to find qualified help, right? I don't know what that 3% does. They must have some magic formula that enables them to find these people. But this keeps getting harder and harder and harder. So one of the things that the Linux Foundation has done is tried to help increase the supply of Linux talent in the market. And we've done that in a wide variety of ways, right? And again, this is another concept of sort of all the things around the edges that make this development process work. Tutorials, white papers, mentoring programs, summer of code, hackathons, training scholarships, on-site training, classroom training, legal training. We've done tons and tons of these projects. Just in March, we partnered with Harvard and MIT, their edX platform, to offer anywhere, anytime learning for Linux. This is, I think, in the intro video, we talked about a MOOC, a massive open online course. We offered this, an Intro to Linux course, and an astounding 250,000 people are taking that course. Can you believe that? We filled 5 football stadiums with people who want to learn Linux. That's just amazing. And so today, we want to talk about another effort that we're announcing at this event. When we looked at all of the different efforts that we're doing to increase the supply of qualified Linux pros in the market, one of the things we thought about is, okay, let's step back and figure out what's the best way to do this. And we sort of said, well, you know, the kernel development process works really good, and open source development works really good by allowing kind of anyone to work on it from anywhere and anytime. And so we thought, let's go do the same thing when it comes to training and certification of developers. And so we really looked at all the latest e-learning technology, and we developed some things that we're introducing today that we think will help. And I want to show you a quick video that will introduce what we have in mind.
One of the hardest things about interviewing for a technical job is showing what you know.
Look.
Maybe you majored in computer science in college. Or maybe you didn't.
To be or not to be.
Maybe you worked for a company doing Linux administration. Or maybe you haven't. Either way, one thing's for sure. You really know Linux and need a way to demonstrate your abilities so you can land your Linux dream job. In the past, you could take an exam, but there were some limitations. What if you didn't live near a testing center?
Hello?
Or what if the distro you work on wasn't included in the test?
No.
Thanks to the new Linux Foundation certification exam, all that's in the past. Today, you're able to take the exam anytime from anywhere.
I'm on the moon.
Imagine waking up, sitting down at your computer,
Thanks.
firing up your browser, verifying your ID with a remote proctor, and taking a Linux certification exam that validates what you know on your choice of one of 3 distributions.
Let's do this.
And the exam actually tests you on what you already do as a sysadmin. No multiple choice, no trick questions, just how you work every day. Now the best employers know you're the best talent because you can prove it by taking a truly challenging test that comes from the Linux Foundation, home of Linus Torvalds and the Linux kernel.
You're hired.
If you want the best Linux job, take the industry's best certification exams and become a Linux Foundation certified sysadmin or a Linux Foundation certified engineer. Join us and change the world. Or just get a really good job.
Woohoo!
We're pretty excited about this. Anywhere, anytime, remotely proctored, performance-based, no trick questions, based on what you can actually do. We tested this platform with some of our staff. We had Greg Kroll-Hartman, in fact, take both exams, the certified sysadmin and the certified engineer tests. He passed the first one. We'll give him another shot at the second one. These are hard tests. You know, when you take and pass these, you can really prove that you know what you're doing. And that's what organizations all over the world have been asking us for. Help us find and qualify more Linux talent because we're dying for it. And I think this is just the start. You know, with Linux. I think we can apply these same learning techniques to bring even more qualified people to other open source projects to help build and kind of get this open source mass collaboration process to light on fire and catch on fire in other sectors of technology. And we think it will be very, very valuable. One of the things that we're offering here today for free to everyone in this room is a brand new, you thought I was going to say mobile phone or tablet or something like that. No, everyone here will get a free certification. So underneath your chairs, there are certificates for you to go ahead and test your skills for free with this certification test. So this is not only a free gift to all of you, but I just have to say, it's actually a direct challenge. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. You all know who you are. I'd like to see you test your mettle against these certification exams. You get a pass, Linus. You get a pass. Greg, you have to take it again. Linus, you're cool. You don't have to take it. So this is just another example of where I think foundations are helping in building this huge collaboration that all of you are responsible for. And so I've kind of gone through a bunch of things that foundations do that are great. And I think what we do adds a lot of value to the open source community. But it's really developers that make the magic happen. At the Linux Foundation, recognizing our role is important. If you talk to anybody who works at this organization, they'll immediately tell you that they don't work for Jim Zemlin, but that they work for the developer community. This is an important ethos for how we run the organization, because at the end of the day, it is developers that make the magic happen in open source and are the most important part of this new era of mass collaboration that we're seeing coming to fold, where 80% of the software that's going to run most of our lives will be developed in the open and collaboratively. And in the meantime, as all of you are coding and working on this great software, we will keep things clean for you. By the way, does anybody recognize this janitor? All right, old people, Breakfast Club reference, right? That's exactly right. I felt really clever coming up with the Breakfast Club reference, and then I showed it to a few people who sort of blank stared and looked at me. So for all of you who are a little bit younger in the audience, we'll keep things clean for you. Thank you very much. All right, before I introduce Greg Crow-Hartman to introduce his panel, I'd like to